So my name's Bill, and I'm a counselor with Brent Mental Health Solutions. Today I'm here with Robbie from Celebration Church, and we got together just to talk a little bit about the intersection between mental health and faith. So I guess I'll kick us off. I see an intersection between mental health and faith by way of people who might be struggling with mental health and people who might be finding their way into communities of faith.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see that rolling out?
Yeah, I mean, faith, when it comes to mental health, is one of those double-edged swords. It's a beautiful, life-giving, hope-giving anchor, but it can also be a really difficult, kind of tragic environment filled with misunderstandings and unhelpful attitudes at times. So a faith community can, for one person, be what holds them together and helps them move through those really difficult seasons that we go through. And then it can also be the thing that causes them to isolate and pull in and keep this stuff close to them, which we all know is really bad for you.
Yeah, it doesn't help anybody. Where does a faith community fit in? Because if what I'm hearing here is that it's like another resource, it's another tool in the toolbox.
Yeah.
Where do you think a faith community fits with somebody who might be navigating mental health struggles, who might not be a part of a faith community to begin with?
Mm-hmm. That's such a huge question. And so obviously I'm a pastor. I come from a Christian tradition, and we experience a lot of times people come into the church for the first time because they're at a low place in their life and they're feeling isolated. They're feeling the heaviness of whether it's depression, anxiety, or something more complex that they're going through. It's really hard to be connected into a community in our world right now. Like isolation is huge. It's a massive problem. So many people are coming into the church looking for something to give them hope. And generally they come in because they're saying, I'm at the rock bottom, I'm at the end of my rope, and I need to know if there's something out there. And what they come in first looking for is God. And usually the way that they find him and encounter this life-transforming love is actually through people. And if the church is functioning well, if a faith community is functioning well, they welcome someone who's hurting in and help to lift them up. I know from the Christian tradition, the Bible is full of commands from Jesus to his people to welcome the outsider, and then to love one another, to bear one another's burdens, to lift one another up. It calls us to live like family, which is really hard for people to do right now. Like we live in a massively isolated culture at the moment. It's so hard to find that. So I think for so many people, the first benefit that they feel in their mental health when it comes to entrance into a faith community is just that fact of getting connected to other people who care, who can listen, who can encourage them, and that they can be vulnerable with. Because it's terrifying to talk about it. Like I'm a pastor. I love the church, but my first experience of the church when it came to mental health was really bad. I was highly depressed as a teen, and had the more or less that it's not as common as people think it is, but a lot of people hear stories about someone saying, "Oh, depression, that's just pretend," or "Isn't that just a fancy word for bummed out, like from The Office, right?" But but I was actually told if you would just pray, that would all go away. I was like, well, that doesn't seem very real in my circumstance and situation.
It kind of discounts the work involved.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that, I mean, again, from a Christian perspective, I think having that kind of attitude it's unhelpful, because the Bible's full of references to things like God is near to the brokenhearted, cast your anxieties on him because he cares for you. That doesn't sound like, oh, that's just made up.
Yeah.
Just pray and it's all better.
Yeah.
Right?
So the one thing that you said was that people who come to the church who have met that rock bottom version of themselves, And if we acknowledge that mental health exists on this spectrum,
Yes.
what about people who are in a pretty decent place and who might be looking for an additional thing to add to what's working for them? Take, for example, if we start to segregate the parts of ourselves into the physical, the emotional, the cognitive, and then the spiritual, what could faith communities offer people who are doing pretty good?
Yes. And I think that's such a relevant question because that's most of us. We all struggle a little bit here and there, but the average person is in this place where they've got it kind of balanced out. We're trucking along, right? I think what you said about looking at the whole person is so important. This is a side note to get into the point that I want to make. But I was having a conversation with a guy who was doing chaplaincy programs in massive military bases in some of the worst prisons in the country. Okay, and he talked about how almost every time there was a just massive kind of negative culture where whether it was working on base with troops or working with prisoners in the prison system, if there was this like kind of widespread everything's heavy, people seem to be getting worse, and they looked at it, they were getting really good mental health care, and they were getting really good like physical training and physical exercise stuff. Their physical and mental, emotional well-being was there, but there was little to no spiritual care happening. And then just bringing that up even a few notches made everything else different, right? Because we're so interconnected. We're a whole person, and we have to care for all of that. Right? So I think when someone comes in and enters into a community of faith and they begin to look outside of themselves towards that which is higher, right? So I mean, was it Maslow's hierarchy of needs? We all know that it's only when we start to look outside of ourselves and contribute to something greater than ourselves and move into that space that we're really getting the sense of fulfillment, and we're moving beyond just, okay, let's make sure that my needs are met, into the space of like, I'm contributing something, and that makes a massive difference in your sense of purpose, your sense of well-being. Right? So in a faith community, what we see all the time is people coming in who are, everything's A-okay more or less. There's the highs and lows of life, but they've got it sort of ticked out. What happens is they encounter God. They see that there is more going on, and or maybe they've come in because they believed they had faith at some point, but they've kind of drifted away.
Sure.
And they enter in and God grabs a hold of their heart, and they are filled with this hope, this sense of there is something more important. There is something beyond just me. I can turn my eyes off of myself and look beyond. And then they see that they're surrounded by other people who are doing the same. And they get in, and there's something about moving towards the same mission that helps people draw together. And then they get in and they experience that same kind of community we were talking about, because we all need that. I think we're more aware of it when we're at rock bottom, that, wow, I can't do this on my own. But at the end of a very normal day, on a very normal week, we still need other people.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, one of the most beautiful gifts that the church offers, that faith communities can offer, really is not just connection to God and to the purpose for which you were created, but connection to these other people that you can actually get into real conversation with, that you can be real and vulnerable with. I know for me, whenever I'm going through the most difficult seasons of my life, I know a few years ago, my wife and I, we went through a couple of miscarriages consecutively, and it was devastating. It was heartbreaking.
Yeah, I bet.
Our lifeline was our community of faith, right? These people who could, that we could actually just break down and cry in front of without having to worry about what are they going to think of me? How's this going to affect their view of me? Feeling all that shame and guilt.
Yeah, that's real.
That's hard stuff.
Yeah.
But those barriers aren't there when you're in this kind of place where you're committed together to walking this life out, and to loving one another in the same way that Jesus loves us. For us as Christians, that's what it's all about, is loving one another like Christ loves his people. So having that community where we could just be real, where we could be raw, where we would be loved and cared for, they would pray for us, sit with us and listen. Like, those are things that I think some of us who've been in a faith community for ages now, we take for granted. And then we have conversations with people who are coming in maybe for the first time, and they've not experienced that at any point in their life. What a beautiful gift that can be, right?
So let's cap it off then. Let's cap it off, because now we've come full circle to people who have already been a part of those communities. Yes. Right? And what advice, I always say as a counselor, I'm not in the business of giving advice, but what advice would you have for people who are already baked in to the church, to welcome people who may or may not be struggling? I think there's an awareness component there, right?
100%. I think awareness is actually the biggest factor. So sometimes, and I'm not going to name drop, but some big name Christians and faith leaders from other traditions will just openly say things like, mental health is a crutch. It's not real. We've made this stuff up. That shows such a lack of understanding.
Yeah.
Honestly, just a basic understanding of how humans are wired. Like, we know our mind matters. We know our mental and emotional health is just as important as our physical and spiritual. And it doesn't take much to understand that. Right? So I think awareness is probably the biggest thing for people who are embedded in a faith community. And honestly, statistically, most people who've been deeply committed into a faith community do struggle less, because they have all of this stuff going on. They have that hope and higher purpose. They have this community. That can make us so blind to what other people are going through.
Sure.
Right? So just taking the time to be aware, to get a little bit of basic education. I'd love, and when I was working with youth ministry, I encouraged all of my youth volunteers to go and get basic mental health first aid training.
Sure.
Understand how do you see what's going on with someone, and be there to help them and connect them into a support. Right? If we can just get a little bit of an understanding so that we know a little bit more about what someone might be going through, then it gives us a little bit more of a comfort level when it comes to having those conversations. Because I think at the end of the day, the best thing that a community of faith can contribute to someone's someone's holistic well-being is to welcome them in where they're at and actually listen, actually talk, surround them, and love them well, which means letting them share what's going on, giving them that safe space, and being able to do that without dismissing what they're going through, without dismissing their struggles, but actually just saying like, hey, I want to walk alongside of you with this. I want to hold you up, and I want to encourage you. I want to pray for you. I want to walk this with you.
I think we all need a little bit more of that illustration through action.
Yes.
To say it and be about it. What about people who may have been part of a community at one time and then experienced a rough exit from that experience and might be nervous about getting involved again? Those people might even be able to see the benefits that come with being a part of a church, but might be nervous about stepping back in. What about those kind of folks?
Oh, that's such an important question, because the sad reality is there's a lot of people who've been burned by a faith community, who've been deeply wounded. Because I mean, everything we've talked about, we've described this community where your sense of purpose is tied into this, where you're vulnerable and real with these people. That's beautiful and wonderful when it's healthy, but it creates such opportunity for hurt, right? When you go that deep with people, and when your higher purpose, when your like hope, your faith, your everything is tied up all into that, it creates the opportunity for a world of hurt, right? So when in Christian culture we call this church hurt, right? And it's one of the worst kinds. Honestly, it's because it feels like such a raw emotional pain. It can be really hard, and I mean, you know all about trauma. You know how intense it can be if you're walking into a building and you're seeing crosses on the wall, and it's taking you back to that space where you were really deeply betrayed, where you were demeaned, where you felt like you were being shut down and cast out. Like that produces something real and raw in us. But what I've witnessed in helping people who've been in that place. My first ministry was actually working with people who'd been hurt by the church and left it, but were trying to find faith and return into that space. So walking alongside people who've been through that, the most important thing, I think this is something I've heard in therapy all the time, but it's also something that we find in the Bible, which is take your thoughts captive. Take what you're thinking and really, really bring that in. Evaluate it. Why am I thinking this? Why am I feeling this right now? What's going on there? And challenging that, right? Because the reality is, just because a faith community was not doing things well, they were we would say they were failing to listen to what God says about loving people. And that's led to hurt, that's led to betrayal. Just because one person did that, well, does that mean everyone else is going to as well? And we think about that, right? And when you take that and you break that, it seems silly to assume that just because one person does something, everyone else is going to do the exact same thing. And think, why was I here in the first place? What was it that brought me here? What was I seeking? And get in touch with that. Get in touch with what was that need? Oh, actually, I recognized I needed something beyond myself. I needed to turn to God. I needed to have this sense of hope, this sense of purpose. And I needed people. I needed people that I could be real with, that would hold me up and go beyond that surface level of friendship. I needed those things. So I got burned by those things, but that doesn't mean everyone is going to. And as you take the time to challenge that, find someone you trust, right? And that the best piece of advice is find one person you trust and go to their faith community. Find a friend that you've gotten to know, and can I come to church with you? Can I sit with you? And they don't even have to be a great friend. I had someone who literally went with her ex-boyfriend's grandmother to go to church for the first time because she had lots of great memories. Ex-boyfriend was not the greatest. Grandmother was awesome. And grandmother was really loving. She's like, this is a safe person. This is a person I feel like I can trust. I may not feel like right now I can trust anyone else in this room, but I can trust her.
Yeah.
I can go and I can sit with her. And then I can ask her all my questions. I can say, okay, the speaker said something about this and talked about God in this way, but that's not what I experienced last time. Like, where's the disconnect? And work through those things. Ask those big questions. Because the really hard part is when we're burned by the church, when we're burned by a faith community, all our feelings about that community also end up getting lumped onto our feelings about God. And we get this all mixed up and it creates that extra level of difficulty. So ask those big questions to this safe person. And then this safe person, they know lots of people they trust in their faith community. And they know where you're at and they can start to connect you in. In fact, there's someone in my church right now who I'd consider a really great friend. And I met with her and talked about some of her church experience. And as we're talking, in my mind, I'm already seeing, I know this person who's been through something kind of similar. They would connect so well. She's got a hard time trusting people right now for very good reason. They're not just going to open up and start talking about this kind of stuff. But you know what I could do? These people are part of my community group. We meet together weekly. Why don't I invite her in and say, hey, like, you trust me, and I've got some people that I think you connect really well with. Do you want to come and meet them?
The map starts to light up.
And you start to do that. And I think that's why one of the most important things really is find someone you trust, go with them, and let them help you, right? Because really all it takes is one safe relationship to start to open you up to the rest of these and start to get rid of some of these lies and like damaging ideas you've got about how people are going to treat you and what God thinks about you and all of this stuff. And just like that, I think it can move you past the hurt and pain. It's a process, it's a journey, but into that space where you can start to connect in and restore relationship with God and with people.
Okay, so on one hand, you have somebody who has experienced a bad neighbor.
Yes.
Right? And that happens. Sometimes we have bad neighbors. Then a new neighbor moves in.
Yep.
And we have to give that neighbor a new shot,
Yes.
right? But there's also some responsibility on the new neighbor
Yeah.
to be a good neighbor,
Exactly.
right? So what would you say to members of a church or faith community about welcoming new people?
I think one of the most important things, and I love this because when someone walks through the door for the first time, you have no idea who they are.
Right.
You don't know their story. You don't know if they are here because they just moved towns and they're walking through the first church door that they see, and all this is old hat for them, or if this is someone who's coming. Let's face it, the reality is we've got people walking into church doors who are coming from war-torn countries, and they're experiencing, like, they have nothing and they're walking in. They need a different level of community. They've got different needs. You may have someone who's coming in because they literally had a conversation with God the night before. God, if you're real, show yourself. Otherwise, what am I living for? Right? And everyone in between. So the first thing is never assume you know anything about someone when they
You
come
can't
in.
see it.
You can't, right? So treat everyone with that welcome, with that love, with that embrace, in such a way that you're doing everything you can to make them feel like this is a safe space for me to come and connect and explore and ask these big questions, and in a way that really reflects that love that we're called to show, that God commands his people to put into practice. I think that should be the default setting for welcoming anyone in, because you don't know where their story is. And then as you start to hear just a little bit, I think when it comes to people who have been really hurt by the church, who have experienced some of this stuff, sometimes we get this tribalistic need to be defensive, right? And to be like, oh, well, that's what all church is, and maybe it was you.
Yeah.
We're not that.
Yeah.
How hard is it to just say, I'm so sorry you went through that. That sounds horrible. Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah.
Like, maybe they do, maybe they don't. But to just be able to step back from that defensive place and say, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that was your experience. Do you want to talk about that at all? And kind of putting those walls down, right? Because what happens if someone comes in they've been hurt by the church and they're trying this again, and they're trying to say, like, I want to connect back to God, I want to connect back to community. And as soon as they open up just a little bit, walls go up, and we're like, well, not this church. Maybe it was you. Maybe you're the problem. They're going to leave and they're not going to come back. Right? And in that moment, we have that opportunity to just be humble and just create that space to listen.
Just acknowledge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, listen, man, I really appreciate the conversation. And once again, my name is Bill. I'm from Brent Mental Health Solutions. And this is Robbie from Celebration Church. Thanks a lot for sitting with me today.
Thank you.